Hello and welcome to the Mastery Talks podcast. I am Juliana.
And I'm Yana, and we're super excited to chat with Allison Kluger today. Allison isn't our typical academic guest. She is seasoned pro in media with lots of industry experience and now teaches at Stanford about strategic communication, reputation management, and leadership.
She's here to share her incredible journey with us, showing how her real-life experiences tie into the powerful lessons that she teaches.
Get ready for some great stories and insights on making big career moves and becoming a master storyteller. We're sure you'll enjoy it as much as we did. Allison, welcome to the show. You are our first guest who is not from the academic world only. You have this real mix of industry experience and teaching smarts. So normally we would dive into the professor's research, but in your case, your life, your career is a life study about what you teach at Stanford. And you're also a professional storyteller. So we would love to start from hearing about your journey in your own words and how it mirrors the lessons that you teach at Stanford.
Thank you so much, Yana, for having me here. I'm very honored, and I love to talk about my journey because I feel that it is a little unorthodox, and in that way, it could possibly inspire others to feel that you don't have to check off certain boxes. So my background is a native New Yorker, and I went to Penn, University of Pennsylvania, and I majored in communications and English. And from a very early age, I just was always very interested in people and stories. I worked at a television station. I worked at a radio station. My first job out of college was at Good Morning America, which was a #1 morning television show. I loved it. I was there for 8 years, and I got to coach celebrities and politicians and authors and real people how to go on air and synthesize complex ideas for the mainstream and make the most of their 4 minutes on television. So I'm a content person, but I'm also very innovative. I always love to think of creative ways that people can use visuals, use messaging, and also physically communicate. So after that, I went to a shopping network run by Barry Diller and Diane von Furstenberg. And it was called Q2, kind of like QVC, but more upgraded products that people would actually really use. And I went there as a producer, and then I became the on-air talent. And I used to do 4 hours of live television every day, selling 20 products per hour in all different categories. And what I learned from that, aside from being extremely embarrassed leaving network television for home shopping, was it was the most amazing education in being persuasive. And I'd have to think, what does my audience need to hear, to do, to pick up the phone and order something? How can I convince them that this is a product that can improve their life or make them happy or make them look good? A lot of that is not just knowing the facts about the product, but the psychology behind what people need and want to hear, but storytelling, creating scenarios that they can find themselves in. So that was a very big step in my storytelling journey. I then ran another shopping network, 16 hours of live television a day. I hired, I fired, I hosted, I did all the promos. And then ABC called me back. They had a new show called The View with Barbara Walters, who was my hero. I had met her when I was 18, and I always wanted to work with her. And they asked me to come and start up The View with them. And that was really a wonderful experience. So I'm back at network television. I'm in a much higher place, and I'm one of the original producers in the control room. So managing the writers and the producers and all of that. And that was an interesting lesson, Yana, because here I thought, okay, I'm pivoting out of network TV to home shopping. I've ruined my reputation. I've ruined my career. But I actually came back stronger, having done so much in the home shopping electronic retail field, executive producing, being on air, managing 100 people. I was worth so much more when I came back to ABC. So what I like to tell people is your path isn't always just straight up. It's like this, and it makes sense. So I did that, and I was there for 3 years, and then my husband wanted to come to Stanford Business School. So here I am, a New Yorker, and moved to Palo Alto, and I got a job at a startup, a .com. When that failed a year later, I was snapped up by Open TV, interactive television, and then I did MSNBC, and then Al Gore, former vice president, asked me to help him start up a network called Current TV. So I did that for the next year, and then I got pregnant, and I had 2 babies back to back. I started my own media consulting firm, but I was a stay-at-home mom for 7 years. By far the hardest job I've ever had in my life. And then I pivoted to education when I decided that television wasn't something I wanted to go back to. I needed to rebrand myself, create a new reputation, and also do something that I felt had a lot of purpose. And as much as I love media and television, teaching and creating courses has been probably the most satisfying job I've ever had in my entire career.
Wow. Your story has so many pivots, and every time you got out of them like stronger, and like you build upon what you already had.
From New York to Palo Alto, from media to academia. Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And you also mentioned like how each time you like your storytelling skill became better and better and better. So can you share why it's so important for leaders to master the craft of storytelling? And also from your work with your clients and with your students, what do you see are the biggest challenges that leaders face when they're trying to master that skill?
I'll take the first part, and you might have to remind me of the second.
Okay.
So storytelling right now with leadership, what we are seeing is more vulnerability and transparency. There are a lot of young CEOs, and a lot of times the brands now of companies are interchangeable with the figurehead at the top. So whoever's leading the company has to really be frontward facing and reflect all the values of the company. It used to be in the olden days when I first started out that the CEO was in an office on the side and no one really knew who the CEO was. They were untouchable. Very different right now. So leaders, fortunately or unfortunately, have to learn how to be able to talk to their stakeholders, whether it is customers, employees, their board, other companies they want to partner with, their investors. So it's definitely a challenge. But what I love is that storytelling helps differentiate people. If you just come out and you talk about data and facts, then you're a talking head and you are interchangeable with anybody else. Anybody can come and say the same thing. But what you can't delegate out to someone is your personal story and why you care and why we should care about what you have to say. So a leader who comes out and says, there's a reason why I'm leading this company. When I was a little kid, I took apart everything I could get my hands on. I was so interested in engineering and in fixing things. And in my mind, I was never breaking anything. I was learning and exploring. And this company is really that. It's how do we fix things? How do we find solutions? And when you tell a story, it's about 22 times more memorable than just a piece of data. The other statistic that's really interesting is that people will remember an entire story such that they can repeat it to someone else, minus some details, but they'll only remember 2 to 3 facts from some sort of presentation because our brain gets overloaded. So that was the first part of the question.
Right. And the second was, what are the challenges you see leaders face when they're trying to master this skill?
I see that there's a hesitancy because maybe they think their stories aren't interesting, or they're embarrassed to talk and show vulnerability because it's looked at as a weakness. There are cultural differences with how vulnerable and transparent we can be. In the West, we are more emotional, right? We lead with feelings and emotions, but definitely in some Asian cultures and some Slavic cultures, it's not as appealing when someone comes off as too touchy-feely or warm. Am I correct in that? So I hear that a lot. And so what I say is you have to just figure out who your audience is. If your audience is in the West, you must deliver what they're hoping to hear. But if there's cultural, differences, if there's a group of mixed, then you have to acknowledge all the difference. Say, some of you, this might seem really personal to you, and uncomfortable, but I'm from the West and this is how I want to share with you. And for those of you who don't feel comfortable knowing all this, the reason I'm telling you is this. One of my number one rules is context. If you give context to your feelings, your emotions, your actions, your wisdom, then no one will make assumptions about you. Everyone's taking in little clues about you when you show up, how you dress, how you.
And in the opposite thing is that if you don't do this, others will fill in the gap for you, right?
They will. And it's not because they're trying to be mean or even be stereotypical or biased. They're just trying to understand. So I always say it's on us. Like, let's make it easy for the audience to know who we are. They can't read our mind. They may not have met us before, so they're going to take in whatever they can. And what they don't know, they'll fill in the gaps, like you said.
Allison, and what makes a great story and how do you craft one? What particular elements you highlighted just for us telling your story?
I believe, and I didn't do this when I was telling you, but what I love to do is parachute in. And what that means is you start at your story. You don't come out, if you're having a meeting or maybe a company-wide conference or whatever, sometimes just coming out and saying, I was 23 years old and I was working for Good Morning America. And I had my first assignment. That's a story I tell in my reputation management class. And what happens is you're starting in the middle, right when a story is, and you're not saying, hi, I'm Allison Kluger. I'm so happy to be here. It's like, that's very trite and very expected, but you get people's attention by starting in the action. So that's one tip. The other is I really believe in origin story. An origin story is, again, the why behind your action. So here I'm going to give you an example that I talk about in one of my classes. One of my students had to do a persuasive talk as an assignment, and he was an expert on the environment. So he talked about recycling and gases and how bad it is for the environment, lots of facts. But it didn't move me. He wanted to persuade us to care about the environment. By the end of it, I didn't care. And the reason was I had no idea why he cared, what had led him to this passion. So when he came to my office after, I said, here, let's look at it this way. What if you had started with, when I was a little boy, I used to walk on the beach with my grandma every Saturday. And we would look at nature, and we'd look at the water and feel the sand on our feet and talk and connect. Once we saw a seal and it had washed up on the shore and it had plastic around its neck and it was dead. And it was so upsetting for my grandma and me. And after that, I picked up every piece of litter I've ever seen, and I still do it. And that was where my passion started for the environment. Now, that's a completely made-up story.
But
No.
that was really compelling.
Right?
Yeah, it
But
seemed real.
Sounds good, right? But what I said to him was, what is your origin story? There has to be a moment in your life that you cared about the environment, and I want to know that. I want to know why you're a leader I should follow. And so that's the origin story. No one can question us. It's our story. But that's what also makes us stand out. And that's emotions are what lead to action. We've all seen those commercials with the pets that need to be adopted or the kids who are starving. And that kind of storytelling is what leads to donations and investments and action. It's not something I came up with. It's been around for ages. It's just I recognize the power of an origin story and the why. Yana, I don't think that people want to be talked at like a monologue. I think they want to be talked to and feel seen and heard. And in order to do that, even if you're the one speaking, you're telling them things that matter to them. Aside from origin story, I do believe that a story that's rich in detail, that uses gestures and creates scenarios. So we call it verbal virtual reality, where if you describe how cold you were, or the noise of the crowd, or how scared you were inside, like when you make descriptors like that, your story is much more palpable. So, description. The other thing is weeding out unnecessary content. When we tell a story, we know way more than the audience needs to know. So I'm a big synthesizer. What is it? I could talk for an hour on anything, sadly, but what does my audience have the patience for? So I just wanted to
Right.
fill in. Those were some other ways to make storytelling rich and effective.
You mentioned origin story, right? And also in your talks, you've been sharing this idea of 5 stories that you should have in your pocket. Can you share with us what are those 5 stories that leaders should have ready to share?
I did talk about 5 stories in my pocket. And what I mean by that is, can you track some experiences in your life that helped make you who you are, but that also illustrate your strengths and your values? And so when I give that talk, I tell a lot of stories, but at the end, I isolate the 5 main lessons and I tie them to a story. We don't realize that times that we have failed and struggled, or times that we got advice from a mentor, or times that we managed a really difficult situation, or traveled and opened our eyes to new cultures. Those are all things that are part of our life, but we don't realize we can tap into them and use them as proof and credibility to how we handle the world around us. And so my 5 stories are specific to me. No one else has my 5 stories. But I'm sure each one of you can think about a time that you traveled and maybe you met somebody who really impacted you in a way that changed your life. Or even you tried a new food and maybe that made you interested in doing something in your career. I don't know, but I think it's important to kind of plumb the depths of your experiences and say, oh, what is a story that's visual, interesting, but has a built-in lesson that shows you the core of who I am? It's not that hard. You just have to kind of list the jobs you've had, the places you've been, and try to think of stories that you've told to your family, to your partner, to your children, at a party. Those are the stories that even though you think, it's not that important, there's a reason why they are with you.
So I wanted to share this story here about how we met with you. It just really brings the concept of reputation management to life. So I have a friend studying at her Stanford MSX class, and one day she rings me up and she says, Yana, so we've got this Allison Kluger's class open for guests. Have you heard about her? Do you want to come? And I'm like, oh, I haven't heard about her yet. What she's like? And she goes, okay, so Allison is that powerhouse in strategic communication. She's huge expert, and she is also amazing lecturer, and she connects with each and every student very deeply. And additionally to that, she is extremely warm and personable. So I showed up, and I remember everything that my friend mentioned was spot on. And it got me thinking, Alison, how did you manage to build such a strong reputation that works without you, that works before you even entering the room, and works even more when you're leaving the room.
First of all, thank you so much for that really beautiful story, and I'm very honored. It really is so lovely to hear that. And I think if I dig deep, and my story is I was just a really shy child, and I was scared of every new experience. I never spoke out. I never raised my hand. I hid behind my mother. If she dropped me off at a party, I was always scared. If she took me to something at the museum and said, there's going to be a great lecture, I'll pick you up, I was always afraid she'd never come back. And so I grew up kind of feeling invisible and frightened. And then what's interesting is I went to summer camp, which a lot of Northeastern people do, New York people, and we go for 2 months, sleepaway camp at a very young age. And I had to learn how to deal with having 9 people in my bunk 24/7, leadership opportunities. And I watched myself go from a scared kid to someone who became more outgoing and started to trust myself. A sign was when I was about 8 years old, and a counselor came over to me and she said, "Allison, you have to stop trying to boss everybody around." And what's so funny is I would never have said I'm like that. Never. But I had through the years, people would always kind of come to me to lead. And so the leadership, I think, was in me. It just had to have an opportunity. But the warmth comes from never wanting to make anybody feel diminished or hurt. Because from my career, which was going from an intern at Good Morning America to an associate producer to a producer and then, onwards, I have been in every position that you could be in. It's kind of like the mailroom philosophy of working your way up. And I remember in those positions how much a kind word meant to me, how much recognition for my efforts meant to me and would encourage me, and how important the surrounding people to the leaders are. For me, those people were even more important. We call them the gatekeepers now. But, how you treat people who, whatever they do, is so indicative of who you are as a person. And so that was kind of the origin of being a shy kid, kind of coming out of my shell, but wanting to make sure that no one ever feels that discomfort that I feel.
Wow, Alison, thank you so much for sharing that personal story. It's so powerful. And reflecting on it and about your transitioning from a shy child to a leader who deeply understands and values the connection and kindness, it's clear that these personal experiences have shaped your own reputation as a leader. Can you elaborate on how leaders can intentionally build their reputation based on their core values and personal journeys? Specifically, how should they manage their public persona and interactions to foster a reputation that precedes them positively?
For leaders, at some point, they will conceive of the reputation they want. Do they want to be all business? Do they want to be the smartest person in the room? Do they want to lead by example? Do they want to lead by fear? Right? Do they want to be the smartest person in the room? We've had all different kinds of leaders. I've had all different kinds, but I know the ones that I respond better to are the ones that have a combination of warmth and competence. And if we talk about executive presence later, that also dovetails into reputation. So I think that for leaders, they have to conceive of the kind of leader they want to be, and then they have to walk the walk. They have to be consistent in showing up the same way so that people trust them and they feel that they're reliable and aren't going to do something unpredictable that's scary. Leaders hold so much power because everybody's coming to work at the altar of this leader. And they don't want to be in trouble, but they also don't want to be invisible. They want to be recognized. It's all of us have been in positions where we come into work and we're trying to take the temperature of the room. I had a boss once who would come in and he'd slam the doors and he'd storm through the floor and go into his office, which was all glass, and slam the door. And then you'd see him gesticulating and fighting. And you know what all of us thought? We'd all look at each other and go, what did we do wrong? I just found it honestly so infantile. I'm like, really, is that necessary? So for a leader, you have to think about what is going to get the best work out of the people who are working for me. And here's another analogy I want to say. Are you both parents?
No, unfortunately, we're both none.
No problem. I can lend you my kids whenever you want. But what I want to say is when I start a new job and I'm managing a department as a leader, what I realize is that not everyone is going to respond to the same thing. So I always take the first 2 weeks and I go person by person and I say, what do you love about this job? Why are you good at it? What frustrates you about this job? How can I help? And then the last thing I'll always ask is, how would you like to be managed? Do you want me to check in on you every day? Are you someone who'd rather send me bullet points every week? Or do you want random? Or do you want to just have an in and out? And I have found that they're shocked, but so happy when I give them that ownership of what they need. Because, right?
It's surprising that it's a choice. It's first time in my life I see it as a choice, that you can choose how you want to be managed, right?
It is. And, I have 2 children, but they're very different. But I've loved them and raised them from a similar place in my heart. But one needs a lot of attention and the other is more introverted. And, they both feel my love, but I know exactly what each one needs because they're different people. Why would my staff be any different, except it's multiplied, right? So when you give people that choice and you respect it and you let them know that you care about the kind of work they're doing and their happiness, they will work even harder for you and they'll respect you, but it'll be quid pro quo. You're going to respect them and appreciate them.
How did you learn this? You learned this from just being self-aware, being empathetic to yourself, first of all, understanding what kind of attitude you'd want from others. And that's how you transfer it?
Definitely that, Yana, for sure. I think some of it is the things that were done to me that I felt very uncomfortable, the kind of leadership that made me scared or question myself. And I would be like, I'm never going to do that. But observation, for example, I have a saying, which is if you treat someone like an idiot, they're going to act like an idiot. So this is when I was in college, I always had a part-time job. I was catering and I was at a big event and, in catering, you have to carry these big trays, right? And they wanted you to carry it with one hand balanced. I'm a fairly short, small person. So I would carry it like this. And I remember the person who was in charge came and said, why are you using 2 hands? I said, well, I don't want to drop it. And she's like, well, don't drop it. And so that 10 minutes later, I dropped the tray because she made me so nervous.
Right.
And later, when the mess was cleaned up, I went up to her. I don't really know how I had the wherewithal, but I said to her, look, I know I'm good and I know I'm capable, but if you treat me like I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail. When you question me and make me nervous, I'm going to drop the tray. So just empower me and say, I know you're going to do a great job. And I really believe that approach with people, showing faith in them, especially with kids, in relationships, everything, you empower people by saying, I believe in you and great job. And so, yeah, it's a mix of what you said, Yana, but it's a mix of me feeling like that didn't work. That doesn't work. That's not how I want to lead. That's not how I would lead. Now, I'm not the be all end all to everything, but I have found that the more empathetic and warm approach with boundaries has worked really well. There's a saying at that same company where I asked all my people, how do you want to be managed? They're like, you don't want to see Allison Kluger mad. Because I was very rarely upset, really even keeled. When I was upset, I would get kind of very terse never yelled, and very matter of fact. And that was scarier than someone screaming.
Allison, you actually mentioned that you learned from your team how they were afraid of you being mad, right? So how do you understand what reputation you have, and what if you find out you have a bad one?
Yeah, which is always very shocking if you find
Yes.
out. Well, I do find, you mentioned so beautifully earlier on that your reputation precedes you into the room and it remains after you leave. And I just taught this the other day for my first reputation management class of the quarter, that I liken it to an echo. But what I say is that if you have a good reputation, which means that people have worked with you, they find that you are reliable, that you deliver what you're supposed to deliver, that you're easy to work with, they will happily preface your appearance and say, you're going to love going to Alison Kluger's class, or she's really knowledgeable on this. And what I say is that then when you come, you're probably more predisposed to like that person. You've heard good things. And if you trust the source who told you, all the better. So, reputation really just builds on itself. For us to keep the reputation, you have to be consistent. And you have to show up the way people expect you to, or that people have talked about you showing up. Now, it's easy for me because that's how I am, and it's not a heavy lift. For me, what can be a heavy lift is if I'm having a hard time in my life or dealing with something health-wise or my children, and then I will have to put a coat of confidence or something on that's a little more performative where I say, I'm going to put what I'm going through in my pocket just for this hour. Because for this hour, these people deserve what they're expecting. And that means someone who's focused and smart and has studied and is prepared. And so that's kind of how and then I say, and once that hour's over, I can fall apart. So it's very much a choice. Reputation is a choice, but it all goes down to your awareness. What is expected of you? How are you going to make people feel? And when it's over, whatever this thing is, what do you want them to say about you? And so that's how the echo works. And that's how consistency works. Doesn't mean being perfect. It means being the best version of yourself when you're in a situation that demands you to be outward facing.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, if I did get it right. And, if you have a good reputation, you will learn about it from people. But also, if you have any challenges with it, you will also learn it from them, right? You just have to listen.
So yes, that was the second part is, what if you find something out? So I'm going to give you a real life example, okay? So someone I was coaching, a C-suite leader, he said, I'm very well liked. I know what I'm doing, but I do tend to be late. And, it's just who I am. I'm international. And I'm like, but you're not in your native country, are you? And he's like, no. And I said, okay. I said, let me tell you how that's probably landing. And you've gotten this feedback. So what's happening is initially it's charming and a differentiating factor. Oh, Joe's going to be late. He's always late. But after a while, it becomes annoying and people get resentful. And they start to say, well, why doesn't Joe care about our time? Why does he think it's okay to be so haphazard about his time? And I said, and that's going to create a really bad reputation for you. And it's going to become a fixed bias, which means whenever your name is mentioned, Joe is late is going to also be part of that fixed bias. And so what I said to Joe was, I said, look, Joe, at every meeting from now on, I want you to set a timer and I want you to show up 10 minutes early and I want you to be the first person there. And this is what's going to happen. Someone's going to come in and go, Joe, what are you doing here? You're early. And Joe's going to go, I know I'm going to be early from now on. And they're going to roll their eyes and go, okay, sure. And then you're going to show up for the next meeting early. And they're going to go, Joe, still doing that early thing, huh? How's that working for you? And Joe's going to go, yep, I'm going to be early. But then Joe keeps showing up early. And after a while, there are no comments. And that fixed bias starts to disappear. Joe doesn't have the tagline of Joe's always late. So the answer to that Juliana, is you have to behave your way out of a bad reputation. And you behave your way into the new reputation. It takes work. It takes time, but it's not impossible. And that's why I think it's so fascinating that we are not stuck in a bad reputation. We can recover from anything if we decide I am going to show up consistently in a way that is more appropriate or in a way that is more believable. And it's up to us. But sometimes we need to know what that blind spot is. What seems normal to us is landing on people the wrong way. And they are, as Yana says, making assumptions about us. We don't care. You know, our time isn't worth it. Maybe that Joe just, it's a cultural thing for him. Whatever it is, though, it wasn't working. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Allison. I think it really boils down to behavioral change, doesn't it?
Yana, it's true that to behave your way out of a bad reputation, it is on you to understand your behavior and take on that challenge. Let me give you a couple of real life examples. So, for example, I teach with Alex Rodriguez, A-Rod, Yankees icon. And he had a terrible reputation issue where he was identified as using steroids, along with a few other players. He was on the Yankees. He was the MVP. He was, truly one of the best players. And what happened is he was suspended for the longest amount of time than anybody, for a year. He is the first person to tell me I was a jerk. I did it. I tried to hide it. I lied about it. I was embarrassed. But what happened in that year? It was really interesting. He said, I hit rock bottom. And you really learn who your friends are when you're going through a reputational crisis. And he said, not only did I realize that only a few people called me, but he said, I had to apologize to people. I had to talk to my children, and I had to talk to my business partners and my teammates. And he says it was, brutal because he was ashamed. But he also went to therapy. He also went to school and took courses. And he made a conscious decision to pivot, not only in his attitude, but in his actions. And what that pivot looked like was transparency. I did it. I'm not my best self. I learned my lesson. I'm going to put my time towards better things. And then he came back at age 40 and had the best year of his life on the Yankees. But every year since then, he has been living this new life of leadership. Now I've known him, I think, 8 years, but he is philanthropic. He loves his children. When he teaches with me, he is warm and generous and learns people's names and prepares. Like, I don't think anybody expects who he is when they come into my class, especially if you read the old stories. They expect someone arrogant and not that focused. And he is as warm as they come and as kind as they come. But I don't think he would have said he was like that 15 years ago. So, that's someone who worked really hard and owned it and doesn't hide from the truth. So transparency is really hard. Let's look at another public figure who we all pretty much know. Do we all know who Martha Stewart is? Martha Stewart, one of the marketing geniuses of our time, she went to jail. She went to jail, insider trading. And whether it was really, justified, she did. And that's a big reputational hurdle. But you know what? She went there. She did her time. She did not complain. She did not make excuses. She made friends with the women. She knitted them gifts. They knitted her gifts. And she came out and got to work. And she never said boo-hoo, And that to me is behaving consistently. She took her punishment and she took it well. I don't think we know of what her inner pain was like or the humiliation, but I love the fact that her reputation is still as strong and she's still relevant.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much for bringing up those examples. And what really stands out of this is that, like, you can control your reaction to a situation, right? And challenging situations are when our reputation is really put to test, right?
Yes.
And we really love your concept of trust radar. Can you walk us through this?
Absolutely. Daniel Diermeyer has a wonderful book called Reputation Rules. It was one of the books I read when preparing for my course, and he had this framework called the trust radar. And what he says is whether you're in a reputational crisis, whether you're trying to identify how to change your behavior or respond to something that's difficult, this is going to help lead you. The trust radar has 4 axes. So just imagine kind of uh, an upward axis and a horizontal one. And on the top, it is empathy. And on the right, it's going to be transparency. On the bottom, it's going to be expertise. And then on the left, it's going to be commitment. So I'm going to break this down for you. When something happens, the most important thing is to show empathy to the person who feels harmed, or to the corporation that feels harmed, or to the party who claims they've been hurt. I am so sorry. This must be terrible. Your house burned down because AT&T's wires were crossed and we didn't check them out, and this is a terrible situation for you. And then the transparency. We didn't check it. The storm was coming. The electric fire started. And now we know that we have to check every week as opposed to every month. Unfortunately, your house was collateral damage. And then you've got the expertise. This is the head of AT&T, and they're going to talk to you about what their policy is and what they're going to do and how they're going to handle this and give you remuneration for your losses. And then there's a commitment. By this time, you will have funds to build your new house. We are going to change our policy. We're going to name it after this city because of what happened. And we are going to make sure this never happens again. Now, of course, I just made that all up. It probably doesn't even make sense. But what makes sense is empathy, transparency. You tell people what happened and why. Things like no comment or my lawyer won't let me talk, that doesn't fly these days. That's very aggressive and people get angrier. Expertise means that whoever the person with the most credibility and experience who can solve this problem or can address it has to be the one, because that shows that the power dynamic is there and that it's important enough for this person to speak. And then finally, the commitment means that I'm not going to just give you the words. I'm going to follow through on actions. I am committed to changing whatever happened. And those are 4 very simple premises that we all kind of intuitively know. But when you put them all together, it's almost a step-by-step primer on how you can handle a difficult situation. But it also works with people. People who in the news have done something wrong. If they start with, I am so sorry, this is what happened. I mean, it works for people. So I love this trust radar. I use it all the time.
Let's apply this to a case. The situation that is on top of my head right now is Tesla Cybertruck demo day of 2019. So Tesla live demo of its shatterproof window technology didn't go as planned, because designer threw the metal ball into a window that was supposed to be unbreakable, and it's cracked. I remember Elon tweet on that was, I guess we have some improvements to make, haha. So I think Elon Musk really condensed the trust radar cycle effectively here, didn't he? And also, if you find yourself in this kind of situations, I really think that it's also great to respond sometimes with humor and humility.
I love humor as a tool. I really do. And I think it is appropriate if you know your audience or if you have a brand. Like Elon Musk has a brand. He's not a touchy-feely human being, right? I think he's might be on the spectrum and he's very blunt. And so, believe it or not, like you said, Yana, his response was totally in keeping with his brand. Yet he empathized. We have a problem. Yeah, we need to fix it. And then he was committed and he did it. And he's the top person. Very succinct version of the trust radar. So I think, yes, he could get away with it. I think a really emotional apology from Elon Musk would have felt like ChatGPT.
Right. Right. So being authentic, right, it's also a crucial point here.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I mean, I always turn to celebrities because I have, been in television for so long. And I don't know if you remember, do you know who the actor Hugh Grant is?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Notting Hill, right?
Notting Hill, right? We all love Hugh Grant. And I know he was caught in a car with a prostitute. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
Right. And he was in a relationship with Elizabeth Hurley for many years. And here's this like good looking, aw shucks kind of, guy who we all love. And now he's caught in a car with a prostitute. And what does he do? He gets on the Late Show, and it's not with, I can't remember the name of the host at the time. And the host goes, "What were you thinking?" And he goes, "I totally messed up. Like I wasn't thinking. Bad on me." And it was one of the first times that someone didn't try to obfuscate, to blame somebody. He just said, "I messed up." And he won the hearts of people because he was like, "Yeah, I screwed up." Jay Leno. It was Jay Leno's show. And it's a really interesting clip because his brand is like this aw shucks kind of, we felt bad for his girlfriend. We felt bad that this came out in public, but he handled it perfectly and with humor because he's known as a funny guy. So a lot of it is exactly what you said. I'm so glad that you brought that up. If I were to add one other element to the trust radar, it would be authenticity. Maybe we should make it a star instead of a radar. But I think authenticity is like if it's not genuine coming from you, it feels forced, the words and the attitude. I don't think that lands well either. I think people can smell the deception.
Allison, considering examples like Hugh Grant and Tesla, it seems clear that communication isn't just about what you say, but also about how you say it, your behavior, and how you present yourself. Thinking about authenticity as an essential component of reputation and trust radar, could you talk about how leaders should use this element to boost their influence? How should they handle their appearance, the way they talk, and their overall conduct in order to build trust and inspire people to act?
Well, I think, Juliana, what you're probably talking about is executive presence as a leader. And there are three, according to a survey, for executive presence is, how do you show up so that people trust you, which also dovetails into reputation, wants to listen to you, and possibly will take an action because of what you say. And we all have had leaders who bumble through or come on and they're totally in their own head and you're just looking at your phone the whole time. So from this study that I refer to in class, the three things that are the first things that people notice about a leader is their appearance, their communication skill, and their gravitas. And I'll break that down for you. Appearance doesn't mean you're a supermodel or you're wearing the most expensive clothes. What it means is that you're dressed appropriately or you're dressed for power. And so this is an interesting, real, true story is that one of my colleagues went to an education conference. There were about 100 people there. 3 people were wearing suits and everybody else was very casual. Everybody gravitated toward the people with the 3 suits as the leaders of the conference. They weren't. They just happened to be wearing suits. I really think this is low-hanging fruit. I think everybody is smart enough to realize that everybody is taking a snap judgment of you. If I came in to teach wearing sweatpants, my hair was messy, and I looked frazzled, the message I'm giving is a few things. I'm in trouble. I'm not prepared. I don't care enough to get ready. I'm not credible. So there's a whole, it's the assumptions again. So if I see someone coming in and his shoes are untied and his shirt's all wrinkled and half sticking out and his eyebrows are crazy like caterpillars, my thought is going to be like, why is he not aware of how he's landing on me? Like, he looks like a crazy, absent-minded professor, and he doesn't look like someone who I can trust. So it just means being appropriate. And people say, well, that we're in a culture where everything's casual, but you need to differentiate yourself as a leader. I don't think there's anything wrong with showing up half a step above what's expected. And if someone says to you, oh, we don't dress up here, and you'll say, understood, I dressed up for today, but in the future. And what the message is you were important enough for me to make an effort. But you'll also be memorable as long as you look appropriate. And, it's just, to me, it's like it's just one more thing that won't distract from your message. So I always say, when you show up, if someone's spending more than 5 minutes or even 5 seconds looking at how you're dressed and how you're presenting, then you've done something wrong because you're distracting from the message. So, if your skirt's too short, or a man's wearing a low-cut shirt and his hairy chest is showing, or lots of dangly earrings that are clicking and making noises, it might be part of your brand and you can get there. But initially, you don't want to distract from the purpose of why you're there. So that's appearance. Appearance is be appropriate, be powerful. The survey that I refer to for both men and women, when they check each other out, do you know what they're looking at? Do you look like you can do the job? That's it. They're not, there are other things like, are you attractive? Are you young? Are you old? What's your ethnic background? But when they are judging each other in a leadership work environment, they're really looking at you and say, does this look like a person who can do the job? And that lends itself to how you dress. The second one is communication skills. And what this means is verbal, vocal, and visual. The words that you use, are they understandable? Do they make sense? Are you succinct? Or are you talking and preambling and not getting to the point? Are you too technical? Are you using acronyms instead of letting us know what they stand for? So it's really important to understand what your audience needs to hear from you. And your word choice is to make it easy for them to remember what you're saying. Vocal, my big issue starting out was I spoke too low because I'm a woman and our voices don't carry as much, but I also thought I was really loud in my head, but it wasn't translating. That's that blind spot that someone was kind enough to tell me, even though I was super embarrassed. I have to make sure that I speak loudly and I project when I teach. It's conscious. If I'm too low, then what it seems is I don't deserve to be here. I'm not so smart. I'm shy. I'm not confident. Again, assumptions. And then finally, there's visual. And this is, how do you stand? When you come into a room, are you hiding your body? Are you crossing your legs? Are you looking down? Or are you greeting everybody and saying, I am so happy to be here. Welcome. Right? And you use vocal variety and emphasis on certain words and energy and emotion and joy, and use gestures that are just support your words, that could calibrate things. If I have 3 things to tell you, I'm going to put my 3 fingers up. So that's communication, and a leader has to be able to communicate well, and he cannot delegate his own communication. He's got to be able to do it. Him or her has to do it themselves. Finally is gravitas. And what this means is, it's like, I give this example of a swan gliding over the water. And whenever you see a swan, you think of elegance, poise, control, peaceful, graceful. But if you looked under the water, that swan's little webbed feet, is paddling furiously. This is a great visual analogy for how many of us feel in leadership positions. We don't want anyone to see us paddling furiously. We can't. It doesn't mean we don't have our heart beating, that we're nervous, that we're not looking forward to this. What we need to come out and say is, I'm in control. I've got your back. I know how to take care of this. And if I don't, I'm going to find you the person who can take care of it. And that's gravitas.
What's one step we can all as a leaders take to align closer with the leaders we admire and aspire to be?
So I would say if I had to succinctly tell you something that would be on my gravestone, it would probably be, it's not what happens, it's how you choose to deal with it. And that really dovetails again into reputation management, executive presence, strategic communication. We are all going to go through life and we are going to have curveballs come at us. We're going to have difficult people. We're going to have difficult situations, disappointments, triumphs. But what speaks for yourself is how you choose to handle something. You can lose control, you can get angry, you can blame people, which really does not do well for your reputation. Or you can say, okay, that doesn't feel great. How do I make this better? How do I find a solution? How do I work this out? How do I communicate the difficulties to people without making people feel less than? And so I also believe you can say anything to anybody if you say it with caring. It's radical candor. My personal brand, if you ask me, is I'm blunt, but I'm caring. I'm a New Yorker. I'm not going to waste your time because that's not fair to you. But I'm going to say something in a way that doesn't make you feel less than, that's going to say, look, I recognize this is something you're struggling with, but let's work it out together. Let's make it better. You're so good at this and you're so good at this, but this seems to be a blind spot for you. And I'm worried how it's going to affect your career trajectory. And that's how I will approach it. And truly, it's like, that's how I would want to be approached because we're sensitive. So those are the two things. It's not what happens. It's how you deal with it. And you can say anything, but it's how you say it.
Well, can't see a better way to finish this episode than quoting Allison that presence is the greatest gift.
At the end of each episode, we are going to ask our guests for assignment that you can do to master the topic. Allison has shared with us 2 powerful assignments that can help you enhance your leadership skills and build a strong reputation.
Let's dive into the first assignment. Every leader should explore the 5 stories they have in their pocket and identify how and when they could use them effectively. These stories could be used to inspire others, share your own failures or learnings, or pitch your company to potential investors.
To complete this assignment, reflect on your experiences and identify 5 stories that showcase different aspects of your journey. This could include your origin story, a valuable lesson learned during travel, a time when you overcame failure or struggle, a piece of advice from a mentor that stayed with you, or a challenging situation you managed successfully. By having these stories ready, you'd always be prepared to captivate your audience, build trust, and inspire action.
Now let's move on to the second assignment, which focuses on defining and refining your reputation. Write down the 5 words that you would like people to use when describing you before you enter the room. These are your dream reputation words. Then ask yourself, if these words accurately reflect who you are and if you can live up to them.
Compare the words you'd like to hear with the words you might actually hear. If there is a mismatch, consider what you can do to change that. For example, if you want to be known as warm, are you really displaying warmth? And if not, think what you can do to change that.
Remember, this is a very personal exercise. We want you to really think about what you can work on without feeling overwhelmed. Take one trait or aspect of your reputation and make consistent efforts to tweak it. Small changes can lead to a significant shift in how others perceive you over time.
Take on these assignments and share your experiences with us. You can reach us on LinkedIn or at team@masterytalks.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Mastery Talks on your favorite podcast platform. Support our show and gain access to exclusive content by becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/masterytalks to learn more.
And there is more. We're going to select one lucky person from our Patreon subscribers who will receive personalized feedback from Allison Kluger on their assignment.
Until next time, keep learning, growing, and mastering your leadership skills.
Through practice.
Right.